Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I would love to hear your stories from the Appalachian Mountains or from the South. I live in Savannah, Georgia, and we have all kinds of weird ghost stories from here, but I am curious if you have experienced.
My friend lived in Virginia and he had 3 stories that go like this. B. Him as a kid in his old house with friend and granddad. C. Little hooded figures running around the house, not ghosts, like real things. Not scared but freaked out, as granddad if he saw them too. Granddad says yes and that he just ignored them. B. Him with friends in woods, lots of old shack-like building being eaten up by the forest. Rumors that they date back before Civil War I, building with a door stuck. Spent all day trying to open it and finally did. Full of tons of old stuff and weapons and shit. Sees a battle axe, not for chopping wood. That's still shiny and untouched by the dust in the room. No spider webs or anything like the rest of the stuff, just stands out as fresh. Friends takes axe. He takes some bayonets and the other kids take some other stuff. Go outside and someone notices tall, large-headed black figures in trees with large yellow eyes. Everyone sees them, go back to the cabin freaked out. Come out battle ready and charge the things with weapons, they are gone. Branches they were at were 8 to 9 feet up.
Southwest Virginian here. The valley I live in is full of crazy shit. Either that, or I attract crazy shit, 'cause seriously, it's like every 2 weeks something weird happens around here. I've got a ton of stories, too. I'll start off with the Bigfoot one I've posted on here a few times. Mom invites me outside to chat at around 1 a.m. We both have insomnia like a motherfucker. We chill and enjoy the sounds of nature for a while. At 1:45 a.m., I wrote a detailed account. As soon as it happened, this freakish scream just tears through the valley. Everything, and I mean everything, shut the fuck up while this thing was screaming. At first it was just the regular Bigfoot scream like you'd hear on a TV show, but as it progressed it sounded more and more agonized. Went for at least a full minute and couldn't have been more than 50 yards up the hill from us. We just stare at each other the entire time like a holy shit, is this real? It stops, and within a moment or so everything goes back to normal. I get up and drag Mom in the house. No way we're staying out there with that fucker so close. I think the Bigfoot, big feet, just moved through our area, as I only encounter them about twice a year, and always in both June and September. There have been a couple close shaves, but even when one was less than 10 feet from me I didn't feel the level of gut-curdling fear I felt when I heard that tremendous roar. If they wanted to hurt me, they'd have done it by now, but goddamn if it isn't terrifying to realize how easy it'd be. Now, how about another cryptid story? I was just a wee child for this one, but it remains one of the clearest memories of my childhood I have. Me, about 6, Mom, and my little sister are home. Mom decides to take us up to this cool spot at the top of a nearby mountain where you can see literally everything around. We're walking up the stone steps, laughing and having a merry time. Suddenly something huge starts moving through the woods right next to us. We stop dead in our tracks, thinking it's a deer, and going, oh how cute and shit. And then holy shit, it's on the other side of the steps. How did it do that without us seeing it? I'm looking around frantically, trying to catch a glimpse of this beast. Finally do see it for just a few seconds. It looks like a giant fucking horse, and I mean big. The horses in our field would have been donkeys next to this thing. It moves like a lightning bolt, incredibly, ridiculously fast for something that size. It runs around us 3 or 4 more times, then just takes off down the mountain, never to be seen again. I still think about that thing a lot. I mean, I've seen some crazy shit, but that thing shouldn't have even been possible. If I think about it hard enough, I can even still hear its hooves beating the ground. If you've ever heard a horse running at top speed, you've got something of an idea of how this thing sounded. just tack on another 100 or so pounds. I've got more stories if anyone wants to hear a shit ton of ghost stories especially, but a few more cryptid encounters as well, mostly Bigfoot. Also saw a cult walking through the woods once, which was actually kinda neat and not scary at all.
Up here, I have another story for Savannah, Georgia. My friend lived in a house that had 3 ghosts living in it. One ghost was a child, one a motherly-like presence, and the last lived in the attic and was a dark entity. I only had a personal experience with the latter. My friend, we will call him Monk, had a party, and the topic came up of ghosts. And this girl started asking Monk tell us about the ghosts. So, Monk tells everyone about how he would walk to the store while he had his laundry in and get groceries. When he would get home, sometimes the clothes would be neatly folded on his bed, no explanation. Monk said that was the good ghost. Monk told us that one was like a den mother, always looking out for everyone, almost like a guardian angel. Then there was the childlike spirit who he would hear racing around the house. He said it would hide things from him, like keys or his lighter. And after he drove himself mad looking for said items, they would just show up back where they were. But the last ghost, the dark one, that ghost liked its privacy. It stayed in the attic. So, everyone is asking him about the ghost in the attic. All he says is, "I don't fuck with the ghost in the attic, it is not good, bad energy, man." So, the girl keeps asking, "Monk, I don't believe you, prove it." Monk says he doesn't have to prove anything. He told her if she wanted to meet the bad ghost, to go up to the attic and see for herself. I was there too, so Monk, the girl and I went up to the steps to the attic. We all stopped short of going in though. He told the girl, "Anytime I go in the attic I get about halfway to the far wall and then the lights shut off and the door slams shut, I won't go in again, it is all you." So, the girl looks at me, like she wants me to go with her. I tell her she was the skeptical one here. So, I say out on the stairs with Monk. She looks back at us and we both shoo her to go into the attic. The attic is a creepy room. From the doorway I see a single light hanging on a cords like you would see in a good cop bad cop interrogation. It is a bare rough light that casts weird shadows for the ceiling's wooden beams. The foot is just a plank over the insulation. It smells weird and there are old newspapers ripped up like a rat's or raccoon has been making a nest. So anyway, the girl starts walking into the attic. Monk is stepping back down a couple of stairs and kinda ready to bolt at any moment. She is slowly working her way across the plank to the far walk when I feel the gust of wind. I thought Monk tried to spit on me because it came from behind me on the stairs. I turn around and say, "Not funny," and the look he gives me lets me know it wasn't him, and then slam. The door slams. I jump, startled from the noise, and Monk has to catch me from almost falling down the stairs. She is screaming for us to stop joking and turn the light back on. I open the door and it is dark in there. I reach for the switch and nothing. The girl is freaking out because she is on a plank in the middle of the dark and afraid she will fall through the ceiling. I had a flashlight on my keys, so I turn it on to help her back. I step into the attic and it feels cold. She comes out and is pissed off and tries to say it was Monk playing a joke. We tell her we had nothing to do with it, but she still tries to say it was all bullshit. Anyway, I turned around and missed all the action anyway, but I felt that gust of wind. It wasn't Monk spitting. I felt how cold it was in the attic, in the summer in Savannah. There was no AC. I believe Monk, and I know why he didn't fuck with the ghost in the attic.
Southeast Kentucky Friend, here. We don't have much in the way of ghost stories other than the story of Tugs Point. Basically, this guy sets off on his mule during the Civil War to meet his girlfriend. He's traveling on the middle fork of the Kentucky River towards the girl's holler when he meets some soldiers, side never mentioned, who promptly rob him, slit him open from rib cage to groin like a deer, then hang him upside with his guts hanging out, because why the fuck not, I guess. So, His girlfriend gets worried because he hasn't shown up to her place, so she rides down the river till she finds him, hardly alive and strung upside down. Unsure of what to do, she cuts him down and tugs him back on the mule, hence Tug's Point. He inevitably dies, and the soldiers are never found. They say, now, that if you stay out at night by the river at Tug's Point, you can hear the girl tugging her boyfriend up the river. For Spooky Ate Me.
B6. Live in South Virginia. Grandparents have an unknown hidden graveyard in their yard, deep in the woods. About 3 or 4 graves, that's it. Grandfather and I would hike through woods, and one day he decided to show me. Recent storm had blown through. We find the graves. They are basically just cement slabs in the ground with no markings. Covered in moss. Grandfather walks over to an overturned tree where the ground is exposed. I follow suit. An exposed skeleton is laying in the ground. I only saw the skull. I remember him acting really odd, and he just looks at me and says, "That's the head of the grave." There was also holes near the graveyard that you would step on and they would sink down as if you were being sucked in. We used to think it was corpses grabbing us out of the ground. Out of all the woods I've been in, I've found some of the weirdest shit near my house. Hiked for a few hours like 10 years old with cousin. We come across a junkyard full of old cars and tires in the middle of the woods with no road access at all. Came across a chimney once, again no road access nearby. We found literally thousands of golf balls and used to collect them in buckets and sell them to the country club. On the subject of Appalachian, in the Blue Ridge Parkway near Stuart, Virginia, if you hike for a while on one of the trails that takes you to a peak, you can deviate from the trail for a minute and there is a massive slab of vertical rock sticking out of the ground. Hidden behind it is some sort of ceremonial thing. Someone places new flowers behind it quite commonly. Actually, out of the 15 or so times I've been there, there has always been fresh flowers. I'm assuming someone died on the trail. Oh, and we called the city about the exposed skeleton and they reburied it in the same site. The Historic Society told us it was a freedman's graveyard. I guess they couldn't afford coffins. And to add to the first story, that's all I remember. Him turning to me and saying that. The rest of it is void to me, which is really weird. It's like things just faded to black. I had nightmares about it for years. I remember after he said it, I turned and ran home through the woods. I guess I was filled with so much adrenaline I just forgot what was going on around me.
Live in South Carolina. I was in 7th grade, so like 13-ish. Cousins come over to hang out while our parents go to Vegas for the weekend. Play Star Wars Battlefront for 12 straight hours. Suddenly it's 4 a.m. Our dog Cinnamon goes ballistic and starts frantically barking at everything. We are weirded out but just try to calm him down. Look out the window. A woman is walking in straight lines back and forth across our yard, zigzagging closer to the house. Always looking straight ahead. Call cousin over. He pulls out his phone and calls 911. As soon as it starts ringing, the lady stops and turns right towards our window. Walks towards us step by agonizing step. Can't see her face. Our pool is between us and her. Cousin is beside me holding an axe from the garage and says the police are coming. Woman walks straight into the pool like it wasn't even there. She is in about 5 feet of water. Looks like she came out of her trance. Starts moving side to side, almost like she's playing in the pool. Starts laughing and splashing. We stand there watching, horrified. Blue and red lights. Oh, thank you, Jesus. Woman stops moving, gets out of pool, runs and hops the fence. We see police run across our yard after her. A few minutes later they ring our doorbell. Tell us that they didn't find her and take a report. We go over to cousin's house to sleep, get call from mom. House alarm went off. They found the woman inside our house after breaking a window and arrested her.
I went to law school in middle of nowhere, Virginia, right where the Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky borders all junction. I was in my mid-20s at the time, and a pretty hardened skeptic. I'd had friends who were stationed in Minot, North Dakota who'd told me stories about the weird shit they experienced there, and I'd laughed at them. Ironically, the place where I went to hone my reasoning skills would be the place where I became a believer in the paranormal. My first experience occurred shortly after I moved into my apartment. I lived on the first floor of a 2-story complex, and behind the building was a ditch and a tall, steep mountain slope. A couple of former Marines I went to school with decided to hike up it one day, and they told me that at the top there was a wooded area and a pretty nice little clearing. In the fall you could hear bucks fighting and turkeys gobbling. I awoke one night at 3 a.m. and noticed a light shining back and forth around my bedroom window, which looked out onto that ditch and that mountain wall. I got pissed, thinking that it was some meth head burglar, and I peeked through the blinds to see if I could get the drop on him. I look around and see nothing, until I look up and see this big ball of blue light floating high above the ground. It was maybe 1.5 or 2 times the diameter of a basketball. I grew up in a decent-sized city, so a lot of what I'd seen in Appalachia was new to me. The bugs were huge, the quiet was deafening, and the weather was way different. Huh. I thought to myself, they have ball lightning here. The next day after class 1 looked up ball lightning and found out that wasn't how ball lightning works. From that night forward, I awoke almost every night at 3 a.m. with my heart racing and short of breath. Feel free to call me a dumbass, but I never connected it with that incident. After all, I was a skeptic, and law school is stressful. I really chalked it all up to anxiety until the following year, when it seemed things started to peak. The next year, I was at a friend's apartment, and we were having a beer out on his balcony. He was a really thoughtful guy who'd spent his whole life in West Virginia. As we were talking, I heard the most god-awful sound in the woods way off in the distance. It was a loud shriek, and it sounded human but not human. Being from Appalachia, I thought he'd know what the fuck kind of creature made such a goddamn blood-curdling sound. I asked him what the fuck that was, and he just shrugged his shoulders. I asked him how the hell he could hear something like that, have no idea what made that sound, and have no curiosity about what it was and not be the slightest bit freaked. He just said, "The woods out here are full of stuff." It could have been a bird, or some other kind of animal, or maybe just a person acting like a jackass. All sorts of weird things happen around here. We don't question it. We just accept it when it happens and just live with it. He went on to tell me about his first paranormal experience, and I should ask him to recount it for me again, because it was really kick-ass and much better than any of the shit I ever experienced, and how freaked out he was, and how his grandmother pretty much told him that all sorts of weird shit was out there and how he'd better just get used to it. He said older hillbillies had seen so much that they just learned to coexist with it. We heard disembodied footsteps coming up the stairs. I went to investigate and found nothing. He told me that's what happens. You talk about it and you sort of invite it. It was then that he told me about the local hoodoo. He laid down some pretty simple principles that have since come to make a lot of sense to me. Try them out. Your mileage may vary. He said that our reality and the reality populated by what we call ghosts is separated by a veil. Like two people on opposite sides of a veil, sometimes we can hear each other. Sometimes we can make out each other's forms. Sometimes what we do can even have an effect on each other. And like a veil, sometimes it tears, and sometimes it's thicker in some areas than others. He said that the thickness of the veil depended on 3 factors, listed in descending importance: human population, time of year, and time of day. The veil is thickest where there's the highest concentration of people. Human life sustains the veil. The veil also grows thicker and thinner depending upon the time of year. It is thickest on Walpurgisnacht, and from that night onward, it gradually grows thinner and thinner, reaching its thinnest point on Halloween. From Halloween, it gradually grows thicker until it again reaches its point of greatest thickness on Walpurgisnacht. Finally, the veil's thickness shows the least variance depending upon time of day. It is thickest at 3 p.m. and thinnest at 3 a.m. Thus, you are most likely to experience something paranormal at 3 a.m. on Halloween night in a rural area, and least likely to experience something paranormal at 3 p.m. on Walpurgisnacht in an urban area. The following year was when things really took a weird turn. I was meditating in my apartment one night, and I saw a creature that I can really only describe as a cat with shimmering green fur. I saw it materialize for only an instant, but I instantly recalled seeing it before, though I couldn't remember where. I remembered its eyes were larger than a cat's, and they glowed yellow. I say it resembled a cat, but really, it only resembled a cat in size and the way it moved. If it had ears, they were slicked back all the time. It moved on all fours, silently, materializing every once in a while, before fading out again. I still can't tell you where I'd seen these creatures before. It was like recalling an experience I'd had in a forgotten dream or in a different life. Most disturbingly, I recalled that there was more than one of these creatures. A lot more than one. And I also somehow knew that they were associated with another presence, and that if you saw these things, this other thing was there, and you were already fucked. That experience really weirded me out, and it still does. By then I was getting ready to finish my 3rd year and graduate. Things really came to a head a month or so later, after graduation and when I was beginning to study for the bar exam. I was having a particularly bad day of bar review. When you're studying for the bar is sheer hell. I studied for 12 hours a day almost every day for an entire summer. I stepped out onto the porch to send a few text messages. Phone signal is shit in the mountains. The only time I could take a call or send a text was when I stepped outside. I noticed that it looked like it might be about to storm. I always liked it when it stormed in the mountains. The weather out there always seemed more extreme than what I was used to, and storms were no exception. I hung around outside and waited for the show. As the clouds rolled in, I noticed that a lot of darker clouds were coalescing into one spot in a circular area in the sky in front of me. I moved to the other side of the complex to take some garbage out and noticed that the spot was following my movements. No matter where I moved, it stayed in front of me off in the distance. I moved back to the porch and I heard a long, loud Gregorian chant sound echo off the mountains behind the complex. Then the weirdest thing happened. The wind died down and it got completely calm. The sky was still overcast, but everything appeared clearer than I'd ever seen it, and clearer than I've ever seen it since. It was like the difference between a standard and an HD TV, but it was real life. It was some sort of completely fucking weird high definition. Then it stormed its ass off. I stayed outside until I couldn't bear the wind anymore and it seemed like it was getting dangerous. I went inside, and the dark spot was still there. When the storm subsided, I went back outside, and it was gone. I moved out a few weeks later. It's been years and I've experienced nothing paranormal since.
When is Walpurgisnacht, German? Have you seen any more glowing green phelananoids? What do you think they were a bad omen of?
Walpurgisnacht is the night of April 30th, exactly 6 months from Halloween. Like I said, I haven't had any paranormal experiences since I left. It's partly from being too busy to really notice, but I think it's also in part because my friend's observations on the paranormal might have been accurate. Have you ever played that old game, Soul Reaver? The things look a lot like those trash enemies that you'd kill for easy souls, except smaller, less humanoid, and more feline. Pick related. It's not really that they're a bad omen in themselves, they're actually just scavengers. They have animal-like sentience. But I know they tend to be wherever this one male entity is. If I had to guess, I would say he's probably a demon. I've made a thread about them before on X to see if anyone had any insight, but surprise, surprise, it didn't get noticed amidst all the role-playing, fortune-telling, and why aren't you a follower of insert divinity here.
Knew a lady that owned an antique shop. It was in Highlands, North Carolina. In an old Victorian-style house with a turret and shit. She told me that all kinds of weird stuff would happen. Expensive items / china, plates, vases always getting knocked over broken. Her grandmother was walking down a steep flight of spiraling stairs and felt as if someone pushed her. It was a beautiful house. People trying to get tours all the time. Some people would get an uneasy feeling. More than once someone went into a seizure there. One day she was looking at the sun casting the light and shadows across the hall floor. Clearly visible in the shadow was the head of a bull with an inverted star. They discovered it was only visible for an hour each day. She couldn't figure out what was casting the shadow. Weird things keep happening. And she gets fed up and does a little research about the builder. Discovers the original architect was a Satanist. Probably did all kinds of ceremonies in the house he designed to contact dark forces. She sold the house.
I actually have a story from my trip to the Appalachian Trail a few years back. I don't know if it's necessarily creepy, but we were spooked and curious at the same time. 24 years ago. Me and 3 friends decide to go hike the Appalachian Trail in North Georgia. Blood Mountain, if you know where that is. We get there, hike for a couple of days until we find a really steep switchback. One of my friends and I are pretty in shape and go ahead of everyone else in the switchback. Fuckmylife.jpg all the way up, God that thing sucked. I end up making it to the top around an hour later. Look down, my other friends are climbing at various heights. I sit on a rock and get my water bottle while I wait for them. Not paying much attention, 5 minutes pass and my first friend gets to the top. We're both pretty tired, so we just sit there. We notice that there's basically no sounds, not even animals or wind moving through trees. That's when I heard it. Bump, bump, bump. A dull thudding sound, following a rhythmic pattern of dropping a heavy rubber ball on the ground, like the time between each thud is halved. Wait a minute or two, it happens again. And again. We wait for our other 2 friends to catch up. They get to the top, and we tell them to shut the fuck up. They hear it too. We take a break and try to come up with any theory as to what it could be. To this day, we don't know what it was. It was a sound that you could feel, as much as you could hear it. It was like the mountain we were on was bumping under us, but the sound sounded like it came from everywhere around us. Since it was something I heard and felt at the same time, it's hard to attach a sound to it, but if I had to give you an example, it would be like feeling someone's heartbeat through your body, or, if you're at a loud concert and you can feel and hear the beat of the kick drum. I don't know, it kind of gives me chills to think about.
I've lived in the Appalachian area for my entire life, and I do hear a lot of odd stories. Can't say I've really seen anything undoubtedly paranormal, but I do have one odd story. When this happened, I was around age 13, so keep that in mind when reading this. A friend of mine had moved away to a county 14 miles away from me. His family had the house built brand new at the edge of a forest. When he finally moved in for good, I went over to generally just hang around. His house came with quite a bit of land that mostly consisted of a forest in what I could only describe as a really steep bowl. Going down wasn't easy, and getting back up was a nightmare. In the actual forest, we found a creek. We followed the creek against the current, hoping to find its source. Eventually, we came to these really large boulders that the creek was flowing off of. Being a couple of 13-year-old kids, we just had to climb on top of those rocks. When we got to the top, we heard this odd noise. I don't want to call it a scream, but it just sounded like a really distant yell. This could have easily been a person, considering hunting season was in. What really made us freak out was when we looked in the top of a tree and saw what appeared to be a man. This guy looked to be wearing overalls with holes in them and no shirt. The sun was setting at the time, and he was right in front of it, so he wasn't exactly easy to see. Needless to say, we ran. We ran in the what felt like same direction, and ended up in the same places. Sometimes we would look back and see him following us. Eventually, we made our way out on a road 2 miles from his house. We made it home, and I spent the night. Occasionally, I'd wake up and swear he'd be in a tree outside of that window. Might have been my 13-year-old mind making me see things. I won't say this is anything paranormal, because we were 13 and in hysterics. I can answer questions about it. I left out some bits for the sake of shortness.
Hillbilly country. You hear stories about hill folk that live deep in the forest like it's still the early 20th century, or something. They obviously don't really like outsiders.
See, I read about that, and thought of that as a possible answer. The only thing that throws me off is how the hell did he get up and down that tree so fast? When I say he was in the tree, I mean it looked like he was actually standing on a branch with nothing holding him up there but his balance. We went back in at a later date, and we did find some old broken down shacks. Maybe that could have been their doing.
Anyone still here? I live in Louisiana, and nobody lives near me for 60+ miles. I have some stories if y'all want to hear them.
I'm still here. Please share.
Just moved in. M24. Had been looking for a comfy as fuck home for low income. Realize no neighbors for long ways. Fuck yes. Live near huge forest. 3 days after move in. Go to explore. Find a rough trail. Animals going fucking nuts. It's always like that. Caw caw caw. Find a huge fucking wooden pole. Smooth, defiantly not a tree. Look up. Jesus H. Christ. 4 fucking nooses. Old and raggedy. Oh shit. JPG. Suddenly, all the animals in the forest go dead fucking silent. What.x click start to run. Fucking book it out there. 3 weeks after that, decide to ride out to one of my neighbors and ask around. Fuck this hour-and-a-half drive. Bored as fuck though. Want to talk to somebody. Find fucking shitty little house. Knock on the door. What the fuck worse dat? Jesse get doggone. It's threat fucking thing again. You son of a bitch, get the fuck outta here. You ain't gonna kill MUH Jesse. Get in the car and fucking book it. Driving as fast as possible. Hear screaming and yelling behind me. The guy's going apeshit. Get home. Sit down and try to relax on V and X. Still don't know that he was talking about. I think the guy was delusional. I have more. Here's a longer one. Running low on food. Need to go to town for food. Start driving. SpongeBob 2 hours later. PNG. Arrive. It's almost deserted. Only like 2 cars. Walk in. Look around. Cashier is some creepy looking fuck with a permanent grin. He won't stop smiling. Average southern worker. Find the food I need. Go to check out. Guy's just standing there. Sir? I ask. He grabs my items. Just staring forward. Checking them out. Putting into shitty bags. I take them and leave. He's still staring. Suddenly he says quietly, You shouldn't have come out here. I just walked to my car. There's a bunch of people by it. Look, he's coming. They scatter like bugs. Ride home. My door's open. It's open. Oh no. Grab baseball bat in my backseat. Walk inside. Oink. What the fuck? Oink. Fucking oinks coming from inside. Go in. Nothing. Fridge is open. WEEH. Something's in here. Find gun I kept in closet. Here nothing. Check every room in my house. Nothing. Close and lock my door. I'm getting fucking chills typing this now. I'm afraid either a bunch of pigs raided me, or Pigman is out to get me. I hear banging on my windows at night. It scares me.
East Tennessee here. A mutual friend of mine moved here from the outskirts of Murfreesboro and told some interesting stories about the subdivision where he grew up. I really can't speak for how true they are as someone other than the guy told me these stories. Kid moves with father to the subdivision at a very young age and grows up there. There are a few kids in the area and they all hang out occasionally. Their most frequent hangout spot is by a dead-end sign at the end of their subdivision. When they've gotten to know him a bit, they tell Anon that there's something they want to show him. They take him into the forest where there is a makeshift scrapyard with some random car parts scattered about. The exception to this is an old car that is nearly fully intact, in terms of its basic shape. They tell Anon to go open the passenger side door. Anon isn't pussy, so he goes to open it. Weird electrical pulse surges into his hand and he is pushed backward, onto the ground. Other kids laugh and they all walk back. They tell Anon that the car was crashed by a pregnant mother and killed her instantly, and somehow obtained by a scrap trader who used to live in the area. One other story I can remember. I doubt this one far more than the other, but either way it's interesting. Anon lives in Subdivision for a while. He starts to have a lot of weird dreams, i.e. sleep paralysis and occasional night terrors. Eventually he tells the other kids and describes the figure he sees during paralysis as a white woman. Kids explain that she is an apparition that visits every kid in the subdivision at least once or twice. Anon liked to hypothesize that the woman was both protective and possibly the ghost of the woman who died in the car crash.
Living in Davidson, North Carolina. In high school, maybe 11th grade, live on second floor of our house. Keep in mind it's the second floor. Have several windows in my bedroom. Always keep blinds closed in case scary face. Outside of windows is maybe 1 foot of roof extending outwards. Late one night, in room alone, out of nowhere a loud scratching noise starts outside my windows. It's literally right on the other side of my windows. Like some intense claws against roof shingles. Goes on for literally a minute. Stops out of nowhere. Scared shitless all night. Not necessarily paranormal but unexplained and scary as shit.
Live in southern Missouri. Girlfriend and I are hiking at a local state park. Started later than we should have. First part of trail connects to a dirt service road. Get to road, but it's already dark and we're still about half an hour away from car. Hear something rustling through the woods to our left. Figure it's a deer or something, no big deal. 5 minutes later, the whatever is still to our left and keeping pace with us. From the sounds it made, it has to be a decent size. Stop and walk to edge of road. It stops moving also. Look into woods, don't see anything. Begin walking again. It starts again, too. GF and I are freaked out. I grab her hand and we run the last 10 minutes to the car. It kept pace and ran next to us the whole time. The parking area was surrounded by a field. Whatever was following us stopped at the edge of the woods, thank God. Never been hiking at night since. That's probably the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. But I've had some mundane stuff happen. My grandma was really prone to weird stuff though.
I was born in West Virginia, then moved to North Carolina at age 3. I lived at the base of this mountain called Pilot Mountain. The town in the mid-90s was almost completely disconnected from the outside world. Hell, some of our neighbors still didn't have running water in their houses, and the first time I saw someone who was not white and blonde was the single black kid who went to my middle school. You know, a place way out in the middle of nowhere. We saw hovering and erratically moving lights all the time. Most people just said they were the forest lights that this area of North Carolina is famous for, but a lot of them were not even in the woods, just hovering over the fields or gently gliding over people's houses. I would stand on my swing set and watch them every once in a while, and they only really put us on edge a couple of times. Didn't think much about them until I moved out of the area and people told me that no, most people don't just have mysterious hovering lights just hanging around their town.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I would love to know more about voodoo, hoodoo. I used to live next door to this crackhead history teacher who claimed he was followed by voodoo people all the time. He said you could see them hiding in the shadows of alleyways and that they could choose to not be seen, if they so wished. More on that later. Thank y'all for sharing the stuff you have so far. Again, sorry my photos are all flipped around. I would love to hear more. I will finish my crackhead neighbor's voodoo stories later. They are kinda a lot to type out and I have to go to work for now. But once again, loving all the stories so far. And getting kinda creeped out about the Opalu, the mask. I found hope it isn't cursed. More info about voodoo would be great. Said I would finish the Savannah voodoo story my crackhead neighbor told me. I see my neighbor all the time acting paranoid about voodoo people watching him. I look, trying to see what he sees, nothing there. He says they are there but are hiding in plain sight. I eventually feel like there is someone there. He tells me to be aware in the streets in Savannah. He says this is one of the 7 gateways to hell. I thought he was just another crazy crackhead, but he is smarter than your average burnout. I asked him why he thought the voodoo people were always following him and he said it is because they saw him spying on them. My crackhead neighbor told me he paid a guide to take him to a voodoo ceremony. I asked if he was in the ceremony and he said no, he paid to have someone take home to spy on a ceremony because he was curious, but hesitant. He had a healthy fear of the Savannah voodoo culture. So anyway, he tells me this guide takes him about an hour outside of the city, which in the low country is the middle of nowhere, to an area adjacent to the ceremony. It required a mildly strenuous trek through swampy woods until they reached a field. The guide must have been familiar enough with the voodoo people, because he knew exactly where they met for ceremonies. He tells my neighbor that it is common for the voodoo sect to make human sacrifices and that local prostitutes often are a prime target because they live a transient lifestyle and no one misses them. The guide gets all serious and tells my neighbor they must be silent from here on. They are close enough to see a bonfire and people dancing wildly, so the guide gives my neighbor some binoculars to see the ceremony better. He tells me he saw all that shit you see on National Geographic where the tribes people get all possessed and work themselves into a frenzy. He said it was all fun and games until they brought out a teenage white girl, naked and crying. He said one of the voodoo people took out a dagger. The girl was screaming bloody murder, but the chanting and dancing grew louder with her. The energy grew into madness. Then they cut her open and the hordes of people fought to tear out and eat her organs while her screams slowly faded. My neighbor said he lost it. He just started running back towards the car. When he got back, the guide had no choice but to follow him. The guide was pissed. He said the voodoo sect had seen them and was probably following them. Get the fuck out. The guide kept yelling at my neighbor about how they would kill him if they found out he had taken him to spy on the ceremony. Anyway, according to my neighbor, the guide disappeared shortly after that. He didn't know if he skipped town or was dealt with. But my neighbor was a crackhead, so I am not sure how much of this story I believe. The last time I saw my neighbor was about 10 years ago. He had been drunk and tried to throw his GF down the stairs, and another neighbor beat the shit out of him and he left. Never saw him again. So that's my crackhead voodoo story.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.